My husband didn't leave me slowly, he replaced me overnight. One day I was his wife, the next I was a chapter he closed without reading the ending, no warning, no long conversations, no dramatic fights. Just a calm voice across the kitchen table saying, "I've moved on." At first, I didn't understand what that meant, not emotionally, not fully, because when you've been married for over 20 years, you don't expect to be swapped out like outdated furniture. My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 44 years old, and until that moment, I believed stability meant safety. Daniel and I met when we were both young, back when ambition still sounded like dreams instead of demands. He was charming in a quiet way, confident but not loud, the kind of man people trusted easily. I was the opposite, observant, detail-oriented, comfortable in the background. We balanced each other, or at least that's what I told myself for years. While Daniel chased opportunities, I handled reality. I managed the schedules, the finances, the invisible labor that makes a life feel effortless. People often said we were lucky, a solid couple, the kind that lasts. What they didn't see was how slowly I disappeared into that solidity. Daniel worked in corporate consulting, long hours, high pressure. He liked to say he was building something, and I believed him. Every promotion came with a celebration, every new title with a promise that things would slow down afterward. They never did. Still, I stayed because commitment isn't about comfort, it's about endurance. At least that's what I believed back then. The change didn't happen gradually. There were no obvious cracks. It happened after one email, one promotion, one sudden elevation in Daniel's world. He started dressing differently, sharper, more intentional. He began using phrases I'd never heard him use before, words like leverage and visibility. He came home later, not dramatically late, just late enough to feel intentional. And when I asked questions, he didn't get defensive. That should have worried me more than anger ever would have, because indifference is quieter than conflict and far more final. One night after dinner, Daniel didn't turn on the television. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded, posture straight, like a man delivering a decision. "I don't think this marriage works anymore," he said. There's no tremor in his voice, no hesitation, just certainty. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I think we've grown apart," he replied. "I've changed. You've changed." He said it like a conclusion he had reached privately, like my participation was optional. I waited for the explanation, the apology, something. Instead, he added, "I don't want to keep pretending." That word stuck with me. Pretending, as if 21 years could be reduced to performance. I didn't cry, not then. I asked one question: "Is there someone else?" He paused, not long, just enough. "Yes," he said. That pause told me more than his answer ever could. He had rehearsed everything except that moment. He didn't leave that night. He slept in the guest room, and the next morning he packed a suitcase like he was leaving for a business trip. Efficient, controlled. "I'll give you space," he said. As if space was the issue. 2 weeks later, I saw her, not by accident, not discreetly. At a company event, Daniel invited me to attend for closure. That alone should have told me everything. The venue was elegant, minimalist, expensive. Daniel arrived late, and when he walked in, he wasn't alone. She was on his arm, confident, smiling, comfortable, like she had always been there. "This is Lauren," Daniel said when we reached them. "My partner." Partner, not someone I'm seeing, not someone I met recently. Partner. Lauren extended her hand. "I've heard so much about you," she said brightly. Her voice was warm, rehearsed, like she had practiced this moment. I shook her hand and smiled, not because I was okay, because I was paying attention. Lauren was younger, not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. She dressed with intention, moved with confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from being chosen. People gathered quickly, questions, compliments. Daniel stood taller with her beside him, as if her presence validated the decision. No one asked me how I was. They assumed the transition had been mutual, clean, efficient, like a corporate restructuring. And that was when I realized something important. Daniel hadn't just left me, he had replaced me, not emotionally, functionally. In his world, I had been a role, and roles can be filled. That night, I went home alone. The house felt quieter than it ever had before, not empty, just unfamiliar. I walked through each room slowly, the living room where we had hosted dinners, the kitchen where we had argued and laughed, the hallway lined with photos documenting a life that suddenly felt theoretical. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. For the first time since the conversation, my chest tightened. Not with heartbreak, with clarity, because grief comes from loss. And what I felt wasn't loss, it was displacement. Daniel didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to move forward, and he believed forward meant without me. What he didn't understand was this: I had never been in the spotlight, but I had always been the structure, the quiet constant, the one people didn't notice until things stopped working. And Daniel had just removed me from his system without realizing how much depended on my presence. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I didn't warn Lauren. I didn't expose anything. I stayed quiet because I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't angry yet. I was curious to see how long his new life would stand without the foundation he had taken for granted. And that was the moment I made a decision. I wouldn't rush my response. I wouldn't react emotionally. I would let time do what confrontation never could, because if Daniel believed replacing me overnight made him stronger, he was about to learn what happens when you remove the wrong piece from the structure. And the collapse doesn't come loudly. It comes slowly. People expect rage after betrayal. They expect slammed doors, tears in public bathrooms, late night messages that say too much. What they don't expect is silence. After Daniel replaced me, I became quiet in a way that unsettled people, not withdrawn, not broken, just observant. I stopped asking questions, stopped explaining myself, stopped correcting the version of the story Daniel allowed others to believe. At first, he seemed relieved. Silence looks like surrender to men who have never had to listen closely. The house stayed in my name until the paperwork was finalized, so Daniel came by occasionally to collect things: clothes, books, personal items. Each visit was brief, polite. He avoided my eyes. Lauren never came with him. I noticed that too. She was confident in public, but cautious in private. That told me something. I began to see patterns the way I always had, quietly, methodically. Daniel had moved fast, too fast, not just emotionally. Logistically, he assumed life would continue to run smoothly because it always had. Bills paid on time, appointments scheduled, deadlines remembered. He didn't realize how much of that had been me, because when something works perfectly, people assume it works automatically. The first shift happened small enough to ignore. A utility bill went unpaid, then a subscription expired, then his assistant called me by mistake, asking about a meeting Daniel had forgotten. I told her politely that she had the wrong number, and I meant it. I was no longer his safety net. At work, Daniel's life looked impressive. Photos circulated online, events, dinners. Lauren at his side, smiling like a reward. But behind the scenes, things began to slip. Not dramatically, just enough. Deadlines pushed, emails unanswered, minor errors that accumulated quietly, errors Daniel had never learned to manage. Because someone else always had. I didn't interfere, I didn't sabotage. I simply removed myself. And removal is powerful when people don't know how dependent they were. The first time Daniel noticed was 3 weeks after the separation. He called me late one evening. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Claire," he said, voice strained, "did you change the password on the financial dashboard?" "Yes," I replied calmly. A pause. "Why?" "Because I'm no longer authorized," I said. "You told me we were done." Silence. "I just need temporary access," he said. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is," I replied. Another pause. "You're being difficult," he said finally. "No," I corrected. "I'm being accurate." He exhaled sharply. "You know how this stuff works. You always handled it." I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them. "Exactly," I said. I hung up. That was the first crack. The second came through Lauren. I didn't hear from her directly. I heard about her through mutual acquaintances. "She's adjusting," someone told me carefully. "She thought things would be easier," someone else admitted. Lauren had stepped into a life that looked curated from the outside. What she didn't see was the machinery behind it. The reminders, the foresight, the emotional regulation. She mistook polish for stability, and Daniel let her. One afternoon, I ran into her unexpectedly at a coffee shop near my office. She froze when she saw me. I didn't. I smiled. "Hi," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "Hi." An awkward pause stretched between us. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. "I work nearby," I replied. She nodded again, clearly uncomfortable. I studied her quietly. She looked tired, not overwhelmed, just unsettled, as if something in her life wasn't aligning with what she had imagined. "I hope this isn't weird," she said suddenly, "but I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for things to happen this way." I tilted my head slightly. "That implies there was a way you hoped they would," I said. She flushed. "I mean, Daniel said you two were already drifting apart." "I'm sure he did," I replied evenly. She shifted her weight. "He's under a lot of pressure right now," she added. "Work stuff, the transition." I smiled softly. "Yes," I said. "Transitions can be difficult when you don't understand what you've stepped into." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then I picked up my coffee and walked away. I didn't need to explain. Confusion was doing its job. The third shift came quietly, through paperwork, through emails, through contracts Daniel assumed would renew automatically. They didn't, because they had never been automatic. They had required attention. Attention he never gave. Within 2 months, Daniel's name began appearing less frequently in invitations, less in group messages, less in conversations that mattered. He was still visible, just not central. Lauren noticed. I knew she did, because people always notice when momentum slows, especially when they expected acceleration. Daniel tried calling more often, sometimes about logistics, sometimes about Noah, sometimes about nothing at all. I kept conversations brief, civil, unemotional, which frustrated him more than anger ever could. One evening he said, "You've changed." I smiled faintly. "No," I replied, "you've just stopped benefiting from who I was." Silence followed. Then he said something revealing. "I didn't think you'd just disappear." I considered that. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I stepped back." There's a difference. When you remove emotional labor, the absence is loud. Daniel began making small mistakes publicly, missed a social cue, overstepped a boundary, made a joke that landed wrong. Lauren tried to smooth things over, but she didn't have the history, the context, the intuition. She was new, and new things shine until they're expected to perform. At night, alone in my house, I reflected on what I was doing, not with guilt, with intention. I wasn't orchestrating his downfall. I was allowing reality to correct a misconception, the misconception that I was replaceable, that stability was transferable, that a life built carefully could be handed off without consequence. Daniel had believed love was the structure. He was wrong. Consistency was, and consistency cannot be replaced overnight. I began to rebuild quietly. I updated my routines, expanded my professional network, reclaimed interests I had shelved for years, not dramatically, just intentionally. The more grounded I became, the more unsteady Daniel appeared. And then, one evening, he showed up unannounced, standing on the porch, no jacket, hair uncombed. "This isn't what I thought it would be," he said. I looked at him calmly. "Which part?" I asked. "The separation," he replied. "The new life." I waited. I thought things would feel lighter, he admitted. "And do they?" I asked. He hesitated. "No," he said quietly. I nodded. That was the moment I knew. The shift had completed. He had replaced me overnight, but he hadn't replaced what I did. And now, slowly, carefully, he was starting to understand the difference. People don't notice collapse when it begins. They notice it when it becomes inconvenient. At first, Daniel's life still looked impressive from the outside. He was still invited, still mentioned, still photographed standing beside the right people. But the tone had changed. Less certainty, more explanation, less authority, more justification. I noticed it before anyone else did, because I had lived inside his rhythm for over 2 decades. I knew when something was off long before it showed. The first real crack appeared at a dinner I wasn't invited to. A mutual friend called me the next morning, not to gossip, to ask a question. "Did Daniel always interrupt people like that?" she asked carefully. I paused. "No," I said. "He never had to." She exhaled. He talked over 3 people, she continued. Lauren tried to redirect him, but it was awkward. Awkward. That word followed Daniel now. He had always relied on timing, on instinct, on knowing when to speak and when to listen. Those instincts had never been his. They had been learned, absorbed, borrowed. And without me quietly guiding the flow, his presence became heavy, too much. At work, the pressure increased. Lauren mentioned it once, indirectly, during another unexpected encounter. I ran into her at a charity fundraiser I attended with a colleague. She looked relieved to see a familiar face, even if that face was mine. Daniel's under a lot of scrutiny lately, she said, lowering her voice. He's trying to adjust. Adjust to what? I asked. She hesitated. To everything, she said. I nodded. She glanced around the room, then leaned closer. He keeps saying things used to be easier, she admitted. That things ran smoother. I smiled faintly. They did, I said. She studied my face. You're not angry, she said. No, I replied. I'm realistic. That unsettled her. People expect anger from women who have been replaced. Anger makes the narrative comfortable. Silence forces questions. Lauren didn't ask them out loud, but they were forming. Daniel began canceling plans, not because he was busy, because he was overwhelmed. He stopped attending optional events, then semi-mandatory ones. Then he arrived late to the ones he couldn't avoid. Each absence was small, but absence compounds. At home, Lauren tried to recreate what she thought stability looked like. She hosted dinners, organized weekends, suggested routines, but she didn't know which details mattered, and Daniel didn't know either. That had always been my role. One evening, Daniel called me again, not defensive this time, frustrated. I don't understand why everything feels so complicated, he said. It didn't used to. I let the silence sit, then said, It was complicated, you just didn't see it. He laughed bitterly. You make it sound like I was helpless. No, I replied. I make it sound like you were supported. Another pause. I didn't realize how much you did, he admitted. That was the closest thing to truth he had offered me in years. I know, I said. He sighed. I thought replacing you would simplify things. There it was. I replaced a person, he continued, but I didn't replace the system. I closed my eyes briefly. You can't replace what you never understood, I said. He didn't respond. And that silence was different. He wasn't defiant. He was lost. Meanwhile, Lauren began pulling away, not emotionally, strategically. She asked more questions, challenged assumptions, wanted clarity Daniel couldn't provide. She hadn't signed up for confusion. She had signed up for a finished product. And now she was realizing she had inherited an unfinished structure. Cracks appeared socially next. A colleague declined Daniel's proposal during a meeting, not aggressively, just firmly. Someone else stepped in to clarify his point. That had never happened before. Daniel had always been deferred to. Now he was being corrected. Lauren noticed the shift, because power dynamics are easy to spot once you expect them. At a dinner party, someone asked Daniel a question about an initiative he had once led. He hesitated. Lauren answered instead. The room adjusted its attention accordingly. That night, Daniel drank too much. Lauren left early, alone. He texted me later. I feel invisible, he wrote. I stared at the message. then typed back. That's what it feels like when the structure you leaned on is gone. He didn't reply. The truth is, I wasn't enjoying this. Not the way people imagine revenge should feel. There was no thrill, no triumph, just inevitability. Watching someone slowly realize that the life they thought was theirs had been quietly maintained by someone they dismissed. I began receiving calls from people who hadn't spoken to me in months, not to reconnect, to understand. "How did you keep everything together?" one asked. "You always seem so calm," another said. I answered honestly. "I paid attention," I told them. Lauren stopped attending events with Daniel. When she did attend, she stayed close to her phone. Distracted, detached. She had stopped presenting as his extension, and that was dangerous for him because Daniel didn't know how to perform alone. One afternoon, Daniel showed up again, not unannounced this time. He asked first. I agreed. He sat across from me in the living room, same posture, less confidence. "I'm tired," he said. I nodded. "Being admired is exhausting when you don't know why you're admired," I said. He winced. "I didn't mean to discard you," he said. "Yes, you did," I replied calmly. "You just didn't mean to feel the consequences." He stared at the floor. "Lauren thinks I need a coach," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For presence," he admitted. I almost smiled. Almost. Because presence can't be taught when it was borrowed. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He hesitated. "Guidance," he said. "Perspective." I leaned back. "You replaced me overnight," I said. "You don't get to consult me slowly." That landed. He stood to leave shortly after. At the door, he paused. "You always knew this would happen," he said. "Yes," I replied. "How?" "Because I knew what I was holding together," I said, "and you didn't." When the door closed, I felt something shift inside me, not satisfaction, completion, because the cracks were no longer invisible. They were visible to everyone now, and the more visible they became, the less Daniel could pretend. Daniel didn't lose everything at once. He lost it in fragments, small permissions revoked, assumptions no longer granted, rooms where his voice once carried weight becoming quieter when he spoke. The final stage of collapse is not dramatic. It's administrative. It's subtle. It's the moment when people stop rearranging themselves around you. Lauren noticed it before he did, because she was watching closely now, not admiring, evaluating. She had entered his life believing she was stepping into something complete, a man with momentum, a future already paved. What she found instead was a man still leaning on something that no longer existed. Me. Daniel tried to compensate. He spoke more, explained more, justified more. The more he tried to assert control, the more it slipped. Confidence without grounding sounds like noise. Lauren began missing events intentionally, not because she was busy, because she didn't want to be seen standing beside him when things went wrong. She didn't leave immediately. She observed. She waited. And Daniel, already stretched thin, felt it. One evening, he called me again, not upset, not angry, just empty. "I don't think she respects me," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. "What makes you say that?" I asked. "She corrects me," he said, "in front of people." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. That's what happens when authority isn't supported by structure, I said. There was a long silence. You always knew when to step in, he said, when to smooth things over. Yes, I replied, and you never asked how. That silence was heavier because it carried truth he couldn't undo. Lauren left 3 weeks later, not dramatically, no fight, no announcement. She packed her things while Daniel was at work, left a note on the counter, short, polite, final. She didn't accuse him. She didn't explain herself. She simply removed herself from something that no longer aligned with her expectations. Daniel came home to an apartment that felt unfamiliar because it had never been stabilized. It had only been decorated. He called me that night. I didn't answer. He texted, "I think she's gone." I didn't respond because this part of the story didn't need my voice. Reality was speaking clearly enough. At work, things accelerated. The scrutiny he had been under quietly turned formal, not hostile, procedural. His name appeared less in proposals. He was asked to support rather than lead. Meetings he once dominated no longer waited for his input. The shift was undeniable now, and people noticed, not with sympathy, with recalibration. They adjusted their expectations of him, which is far more damaging than rejection. Daniel tried to recover. He reached out to old contacts, scheduled lunches, proposed initiatives. But momentum doesn't respond to desperation. It responds to trust. And trust had eroded. He had mistaken visibility for value. When visibility faded, there was nothing beneath it. I heard about his professional demotion through a mutual acquaintance. No one said it directly. They didn't need to. The tone changed. Things are different for him now. Different is what people say when the truth feels impolite. Daniel showed up at my house one final time. He looked older, not because time had passed, because illusion had lifted. "I know I don't have the right," he said, standing on the porch, "but I need to understand something." I folded my arms, calm. "What?" I asked. "How did you hold everything together for so long," he said, "without anyone noticing?" I studied him, because that question mattered. "I noticed," I said. He frowned, "But no one else did." "That's the point," I replied. He looked down. "I thought replacing you would give me freedom," he said quietly. I nodded. "You thought I was weight," I said, "not balance." He swallowed. "I didn't see you," he admitted. "No," I said, "you saw what I provided." That landed differently. He didn't argue, didn't defend, just stood there with the understanding settling in. "I'm tired," he said. "Yes," I replied, "because now you're carrying your own life." He left shortly after, and I felt no need to follow him with my eyes because my attention had already shifted forward. I didn't rebuild loudly. I rebuilt intentionally. I refined my routines, expanded my professional reach, reconnected with people who knew me beyond the role I played in Daniel's life. I stopped shrinking to keep peace, stopped smoothing edges that weren't mine to manage, and slowly, quietly, my life became lighter, not because I had lost something, because I had stopped carrying what wasn't acknowledged. Daniel faded, not from existence, from relevance, which is far more painful. He still existed. He just no longer mattered in the spaces that once defined him. Months later, I saw him across a room at a networking event, standing alone, checking his phone, waiting for someone to notice him. No one did. And I realized something important. The man who replaced me overnight had never replaced what I did. Because what I did wasn't visible, it was foundational. And foundations don't announce themselves when they're gone, they let structures fall. The irony is this: Daniel thought he was upgrading his life. What he actually did was remove the stabilizer. He mistook novelty for strength, attention for authority, replacement for progress. And I let him. Because the most effective revenge isn't exposure, it's absence. Absence of protection, absence of correction, absence of emotional labor. When you stop holding someone together, they have to learn who they are alone. And not everyone survives that lesson intact. I didn't win because he failed. I won because I stopped trying to be essential to someone who never learned how to see me. He replaced me overnight. I replaced an entire life. And unlike him, I didn't need anyone to notice.